What up? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. On this podcast, we love to talk about crowdfunding. We talk about how to raise money successfully from the crowd. How do you get that funding you need? How do you actually turn ideas into reality? How do you, for example, raise money for a physical product? So you can get the funds, you can produce this thing, you can maybe even pay for your molding costs, and you can get this product out there to the world, right? A whole new invention that's in the hands of other people. We do talk about other subjects on this show as well. Sometimes we talk about nonprofit crowdfunding, how to raise money when it comes to causes. Sometimes we also talk about equity crowdfunding, how to raise money for startups in the audience if you want to raise investment capital from the crowd. And we talk as well, I think, for a lot of the creative people in the audience. And I'm kind of a creative person myself, honestly. Like, I love, whether it's artistic endeavors, I love art, I love writing, I love all that kind of stuff. I've written actually 10 books in the industry. And this is a passion of mine. This is something I do. I do view myself as an artist first and as a business owner second, though that it obviously is a pretty strong second as well. But for me, this is something that I do as a passion, as a labor of love, as something I'm trying to share with you, education and information that's going to move you forward in your endeavors. And particularly when it comes to doing a crowdfunding campaign, I think that one of the biggest questions I've been getting recently, one of the mysteries, is how the heck do you make a product from scratch? How do you do it? How do you take something that's an idea in your head to maybe being a sketch on a napkin, to then going from concept sketches to 3D renders, to then having a prototype, to having a model of some kind, maybe even being made out of foam core, how to then take that into something that's functional and working and go through iterations and iterations, eventually have a presentation prototype that you share with the world and do a Kickstarter campaign for, where you get tons of funding because you follow everything I say, right? On the show and also in my book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula. So to me, this is where the journey begins. And if you're struggling, if you feel like you want to do one of these campaigns and you want more clarity on this initial part or this initial piece of the puzzle, which is creating a product from scratch, creating something from nothing. If you really want to discover the secret that goes into that, you're going to want to listen to this podcast episode because, oh man, I brought on an expert when it comes to turning those ideas into reality, actually prototyping, creating a model, creating something that's actually working when it comes to a new product in the world. This individual has been doing this for a long time. He's brought many products to market in the past, and today he's sharing with you literally the framework that you can take any idea in your head and turn this into something real. And he does it in a very candid, no-nonsense, practical fashion. So I hope that you enjoyed today's podcast episode. It's a little bit different in that we're not talking necessarily about raising funds, which I say was probably a pretty common theme, right, on this show. If you want to learn more about that, you can obviously go and listen to some of my other episodes out there on Spotify, on iTunes, on YouTube. You can listen to some of my episodes there. I also got my book, obviously, The Kickstarter Launch Formula, which you can check out on Amazon or on Audible at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. But one of the things that I'm doing more as well is I'm putting out more education on this particular subject. Got some great videos out there on YouTube. And if you want to kind of be the first to know when I'm putting out more information, go and check out and hop on my newsletter, Killer Crowdfunding Tips, at crowdcrux.com/newsletter. That link is crowdcrux.com/newsletter. crowdcrux.com/newsletter will take you there. You can enter your name and email. You'll get notified of any kind of new stuff I got on actually creating new products. So that being said, let's really dive right in and discover how anyone out there, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what kind of idea you have, you can actually take action on this. There is a step-by-step proven process that hundreds and thousands and millions of people in the past of human history have gone through to take those ideas that they've had, those engineering concepts, those inventions, to take them and to bring them into something, into a functional form factor, which other people can use, other people can experience, other people can fill their life with, fill their homes with. There's a step-by-step process to that, and you are discovering that on today's podcast. Let's get right into it. Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we are speaking about creating a new product and really doing that from scratch. And man, I brought on an expert, the man himself when it comes to getting new products made. He's been doing this for a while. He is the founder of Product Quick Start. Noah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. Would love to get started. Maybe you could just tell listeners a bit about your background, how long you've been doing this business, and what kind of led you to this.
Well, sure. So my road to this particular version of product development has had some twists and turns. for what it's worth, my educational background is in two fields. My undergraduate degree was in a field called mechanical engineering. So as far as products go, that's all the nerdy engineering stuff related to how do you make something work, how do you make it the right materials, how do you make sure it's manufacturable. But my graduate degree was in a field called industrial design, and that is the more, I would call it the human side of product development. So in that space, I look at things like ergonomics and aesthetics and all the reasons that a person would want to use a product. So, that was about 25 years ago. I finished those educational experiences, and they were great, but I've learned a lot more since then. First 10 or 15 years of my career, I did mostly development work for very large companies like Black & Decker and Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Procter & Gamble, and on and on. Lots of companies you'd be familiar with. Probably most people in the audience have at least seen a product I worked on in that capacity. But then and I grew another company, had about 40 employees, designers, engineers, scientists, salespeople, really big organization. And then doing that kind of work. And about 10 years ago, I just really got kind of burned out on it. All I was doing was managing people. I wasn't doing any of the fun stuff that I got into this business to do, like innovating and designing and engineering and building stuff. And that's how Product Quick Start was born. Very intentionally, a small company, very intentionally focused on the needs of entrepreneurs and startups and people who may not have been through the process before. And that was 10 years ago, and I've not looked back. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
And for you, what is the part of the process that you enjoy the most? Is it working with someone else? Is it coming up with something from scratch? Is it solving complex engineering problems? What do you really enjoy most about it?
Well, that's a tough question because the process is so very much interlaced. And if I don't do a great job, or me and the client don't do a great job on any one part of that, it can be problematic. So I definitely enjoy the early stages of understanding why someone is passionate about what they're trying to do and what they're really trying to accomplish, what's the problem they're solving. I enjoy that part, but equally, I also enjoy when that product, when we get the first sample in from the factory and everything's great. And I enjoy seeing how excited the clients are to actually be launching their business at that point too. So all the stuff in the middle, it's fun. It's stuff I do. It's my, it's my day to day. But those 2 points, that understanding the passion at the beginning and then seeing that passion come to fruition at the end, those are the things that really drive me.
And is there a certain type of product that you would say you do work on or don't work on, whether that's electrical engineering components versus like a fashion item, versus someone coming to you and want to make something like a plastic? Like, are there any kind of products you don't work on?
So my sweet spot and the sweet spot of my colleagues is going to be mostly in physical products like plastic, metal, some electronics. We're not going to design the next iPhone. That's a whole other kind of sphere unto itself. Although simple electronics like meat thermometers, we've done plenty of that kind of stuff. When it comes to fashion, that's also a very different field. If you're talking about clothing fashion or fashion accessories, that's a little bit outside of our sphere. We don't do any software other than some of the basic software that might be hard coded onto the firmware of a computer chip in a product.
So anytime you go to a networking event, I'm sure you have tons of people come up to you and like, dude, I got the next greatest idea, right? What are some of the criteria, at least, that you look for when it comes to really spotting a winner or spotting someone who really has a good idea or something that is worth bringing into the real world?
Mm-hmm. So a good idea is really just a small part of the overall path to success. The person themselves is actually a very critical piece to that. How driven are they? How passionate are they? Everybody's got an idea for something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody wants to devote a big chunk of their life toward building a business around that and taking all the risks associated with that. So I would say the bigger criteria for me really is the passion and drive of the person that's involved. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't really have a drive to build a business, you're not going to succeed. I mean, there are a lot of inventor clubs out there, and more power to them. But there's a lot of people that just go to those clubs to show off their idea, and that's as far as they ever get. That's their passion stops at the point where they created their prototype, but they don't really have a passion for building a business. So I tend to look for people that that have either they have a business sense or they know they need to bring someone on board that has that level of business drive to get a company launched.
Got it. So if you have someone coming to you, they're super passionate, they have a little bit of business acumen when it comes to that. Are you ever, putting things through criteria like it has to solve a problem, or it has to be unique, or it has to be have a certain amount of functionality? Do you think through those kinds of terms, or is that not how you approach it?
To an extent, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to solve a problem. It can take advantage of an opportunity. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you look at something from back. I'll age myself here. You look at something from back in the '80s, the Rubik's Cube. It was a wildly successful product. It didn't necessarily solve any problems, but it took advantage of an opportunity. It's just, hey, there's an opportunity there's a hole in the marketplace for people to have these cool little puzzles they can carry around with them. So it became a great, successful product because of that. So it does generally, to have a chance of success, it needs to solve a problem that's a big enough problem. I mean, if it's a problem for 12 people, that's not going to work. It's got to solve a big enough problem or take advantage of a big enough opportunity or fill a hole in the marketplace that's big enough. So that's a key criteria towards success. And then, of course, I go down all the basic engineering. When I meet with somebody, sometimes it's just a 20-minute call, and we can go through an understanding of what they're trying to do. And right off the bat, with a lot of people, I identify, okay, you've got a problem with physics, you've got a problem with manufacturing, you've got a problem with this, yada, yada, yada. All these things I see as real pitfalls for you. Mm-hmm. So what I'll do in those cases, I'll explain to them, here's the problems I see up front. Before you spend any money with me or anyone else, you need to think about, is there a way to address these problems? And, sometimes if it's a physics or a manufacturing thing, I can address that for them. But if it's a marketplace problems, like, I've got this great idea, but there's only 10 people that live in Ontario that will ever buy this, and that's it. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem I can't solve for you. You got to rethink that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess one of my questions is, when it comes to bringing something new into the world, I think there are people that are more intellectual than people that really just like to get their hands dirty, right? Mm-hmm. Do you find when people are really looking to execute upon this, are they first coming to you with, some kind of a working prototype, maybe made of household items? Are they usually coming with sketches or a concept, or is it kind of like across the board?
It is across the board. I would say the ones that tend to be the most successful are the ones that have taken that time to build that garage prototype, or if maybe they're not handy that way, they've at least sketched it out. I had this one lady, she hired a kid in the neighborhood to build something out of popsicle sticks and woodworking stuff one time. It's, it can be any number of things, but if you've just got this sort of ephemeral idea, it's hard to understand if you're going to be able to make that into a product. I work with people like that sometimes, and a big part of what I do there is really taking that idea and trying to break it down into, how can this actually work in the real world, and not just physically, but with the right manufacturing processes. Can it be made at a price that the market would bear for whatever problem it's trying to solve?
And, for those people who think about creating this garage prototype, I mean, I think a lot of people can think about that and like, that kind of sounds silly, right? Like, just using household items, like making something. Why is that integral? Why is that important?
Well, in terms of dollar for dollar, you're going to get the most value out of those types of prototypes. So, there are people that'll go out there, they'll 3D print something, and that's great. There are people that'll go out and they'll machine something out of aluminum, or all these sort of expensive processes. However, at the very beginning, maybe you just want to know, well, if I have a lever over here and it's lifting a thing over here, is that even physically possible? you can learn a lot about that with $10 worth of wood from Home Depot before you go down deeper into more expensive prototyping routes. There's a time for all those things, but you don't want to go out and you don't want to go spend $10,000 on a prototype if you don't even understand the physics of, is it even possible? And that's something you can often learn, again, with $50 worth of materials.
So almost figuring out what do you want to know, in each stage sounds to be actually the most important, right? And kind of that maybe being the guiding, going through this stage to figure out what do I really want to, come away with this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look at it as eliminating unknowns. So at the very beginning of a process, when you're developing a product, you've got the maximum amount of unknowns. So you want to kill the biggest ones of those you can, using as little resources as possible. Kill the big unknowns, the ones you can kill cheaply first, then narrow it down to the point where, okay, well, now I've got this unknown. I don't know if it needs to be made out of plastic or metal. I don't know what kind of fasteners I'm going to use. I don't know if I can manufacture. That's when you can look to an expert like me, someone that can help you solve that unknown. You probably have to pay them to do that, but you're not paying them to figure out the stuff you can easily figure out on yourself by yourself.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that also makes it so it's much more efficient, right? When you are working with someone like yourself to bring a new product into the world.
Right.
Another question I had, comes down to sort of like the stages, which I do think is kind of, not super clear. And also if you actually have to go through all these stages. So like off the top of my mind, I think, concept sketches, maybe 3D printing, garage prototype, going then to like a working prototype and kind of going from there, to something that's ready to be mass produced. What are some of the stages in your mind that you kind of think about for someone creating something new?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the reasons it's not clear is because every program is a little bit different. And I think that there are, I certainly, there are companies out there that will try to fit every project into a particular roadmap. And that's really not, in my view, that's not the right way to do it, because there are different paths to get to the end destination, and we want to find the most efficient path and most likely to succeed path that we can. So if I were to just take really broad brushstrokes of stages, the first stage is really, it's what I would call design direction or engineering direction. Let's figure out the theory of what we want to build. Is it what does it do, and what are its functional components? Is it, how big is it? All those sort of simple things, and that generally concludes, might be garage prototype, might be some sketches, might be some really rough illustrations of, hey, here's what it does. This is an ugly prototype, and here's kind of what we want it to look like. Once you get done with that, then you can move into the phase of converting that into a manufacturer / prototype ready design. So we take that initial pass and we think about, okay, well, this one was made out of wood and 3D printing and all this sort of stuff. How do we make that into a moldable part or a sheet metal part or a combination or, whatever it is. And then kind of a subset of that stage is where you make the prototype that looks like and works like the real thing. And there are lots of different ways to do that. Sometimes we do that in-house using our equipment if we're trying to figure out a lot of things. Sometimes at that point, it's actually much cheaper and more efficient for the client if we start working with one or more factories to build that prototype using factory equipment. And then, of course, the stage beyond that is tooling up and manufacturing.
And throughout that process, are you continuing to get feedback from end users, or is that something you wait until the very end to get feedback from people?
That's a little bit dependent on. I know it sounds like every question I answer is depending on the specifics. But
it sounds like a lot of nuance, though, so I totally respect that.
It is a lot of nuance. So I encourage clients to get as much honest feedback as they can from end users, and that doesn't necessarily mean going out and spending thousands of dollars on a focus group or some sort of massive survey. I mean, that's what big companies do. Big companies can afford to do that. And frankly, I was involved in a $100,000 focus group exercise with a very large company that everyone in the audience would be familiar with. And I'm going to be honest with you, $3,000 into that, we had the answer. And the rest of it was just CYA for the company executives that wanted to be able to point to that focus group if something went wrong and say, hey, look, we did what the focus group said. It was all about decision avoidance, or again, CYA on those decisions for those big companies. Small companies, entrepreneurs, you really don't need to spend your money that way most of the time. Now, there's exceptions to every rule. Most of the time, you need to make sure that you are doing at least some guerrilla level analysis of the marketplace. So if you've got a market, or if you've got a product that's going to be for, young fathers, well, put your own focus group together. Make sure, don't use your friends, but you can go out to, there's ways to do this on, places, and just have them all over for a barbecue, and so give them $100 gift certificate and get them, walk them through your product and ask them all the questions. Do it informally. You as an entrepreneur probably cannot afford a 10,000 response level survey, and you don't need that.
And it's kind of overblown, it sounds like, right?
9 out of 10 times, yes. I mean, there are, again, exceptions to every rule.
That makes sense. What's your favorite product that you've worked on? I mean, obviously you have a pretty long and illustrious career here, right? But if you got to pick one or two that kind of stand out to you, do we know any of them, or have you any products that you could share that you really liked working on?
Sure. So, the older I get, the less I can remember, and I've been involved literally. At one point, I added it up. It's well over 100 products that have made the market that I've worked on. So let me just talk about one that launched really in the last couple of months that I'm really proud of. And it is it's an immersive sound system for VR headsets. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Oculus Quest, and then there's a few others out there. One of the complaints people often have about those is, well, the sound, the sound's not great, and then you can put these big headphones on and stuff like that. But with this client, that's called Conquest headphones. We worked together and developed this very adjustable earphone set that clips right onto the Oculus or to most other VR headsets, and it's actually 3-dimensional sound, which is it's kind of cool too. It's not just stereo; it actually, you're in these environments. You turn your head to the left, and the sound also adjusts 3-dimensionally, which is just blows my mind. I didn't do the electronics on that, but what I was involved with that I was really proud of is the ergonomics and the massive level of adjustability. So this thing adjusts in 1, 2, 3, 4, like 7 different ways. And engineering and design, engineering that alone was a really cool challenge, but also designing it so that it looked great and it worked with the, with the aesthetics of the Oculus and some of the other headsets that were out there. It was a really cool project. So I'm really proud of that one. Again, it's called Conquest VR, and you can find them on the web, on the internet, and they just started shipping, and there's lots of reviews out there on them too.
If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist, fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. So here's kind of a dumb question for you. So when you use that word ergonomics, I think that's kind of a word we've heard like so often, but we don't really know what that means. Mm-hmm. Are you kind of referring to the way the user interacts with it, or the feel, or the design? What do you really mean by that word?
Ergonomics, and I don't have the dictionary definition in front of me, so I'm sure one of my professors would slap me for just giving my layman's definition. But when I use the word, I mean the comfort level of using an item or an object, and that can mean physically, like, hey, that drill, it's got a real comfortable grip and it buttons in all the right place. But it can also mean, to some extent, how intuitive an item is to use. It can mean, is it comfortable enough that I can use it repetitively? Are the is it also designed in such a way that a wide array of users can use it? In other words, a 90-pound teenage girl versus a 280-pound ex-Marine, can they both use it comfortably? And I think ergonomics covers a lot of that space.
Got it.
And it's mostly physical comfort, but I think there's also some sort of mental comfort there too. Again, in
Mhm.
how many keys do I have to touch on this thing to make it work is kind of a big thing in ergonomics as well.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. One other question I had, just kind of on your path, is, tell me the story, or tell me the time when you really realized that making this decision in your life to go and do something on your own in a smaller capacity, and obviously that was kind of a risk for you, when that really, like, you were like, yes, that was the right decision. Is there a moment in time where that happened?
Well, there was a couple of moments in time. Well, the moment in time when I decided I've got to make this decision, that was after in the former company where I was the CEO for several years. I realized at the end of one week that I'd spent the entire week managing interpersonal conflicts between employees. This designer didn't like working with this engineer. This scientist over here is a bit of a prima donna. He didn't work with anybody. All that stuff. I spent a whole week working on that. And I was like, I'm getting. I just turned 40, and I was like, I don't. Or I was about to turn 40. And I was like, I'm either going to end up doing this the rest of my life and be miserable, or I'm going to try something new. And that's when the decision. It was definitely. I realized it was right to make the decision. In terms of realizing that it was the right decision, I'd say about 2 or 3 years after that, I just was really enjoying engaging with clients. I was having a lot of one-on-one meetings or small group meetings with these clients, listening to their stories about what they were doing, why they wanted to do it, and I was just having a ball sitting down brainstorming with them about how to get them across the finish line. So that's I can't point to a single event. It was really more of a transition, but at one point, I just realized I really love what I do, and
Yeah, that sounds really
I
rewarding,
still love it.
for sure. So I just got a couple more process questions for you. And it's really interesting to hear the way that you talk about your work, and how multifaceted it is, and obviously the engineering and the design side. So it's really, really cool. One of the questions I had for you, and I think I've been hearing this more, at least when it comes to Elon Musk and people like that, talking about how different a prototype is from something that can be manufactured in mass quantity. Why
Mhm.
is there such a big difference there? Can you shed some light on that?
So I would say I look at prototyping as a process. Along the path, you're going to make multiple prototypes, and the first ones are going to be ugly, like I said, garage prototypes. By the end of the day, you are going to have, by the end of the process, right before you pull the trigger on mass production, you're going to have a prototype that's very much like that mass production item. The key difference is with a prototype, you can do a lot of cheating. You can spend 3 or 4 days grinding on a prototype and massaging it to get everything perfect. You can't do that when you're pumping out 10,000 of these a month. There's just not that level of time available. So you have a lot of ability to spend more time getting a single prototype working. B, you don't have to adhere to the various manufacturing rules. For instance, like if I'm going to mold a piece of plastic, there's certain things I have to do. It's got to be shaped a certain way, or it won't come out of the mold. It's got to, it's got to follow certain rules, or it'll crack. All these. I'm not going to bore you with all the millions of little engineering details that have to be adhered to when you're mass producing something. You don't have to adhere to all that when you're prototyping. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs and engineers, even some engineers that maybe aren't as experienced, they'll think, well, I can 3D print it. Well, that's a prototype, and that means I'm there. Well, no, because in 3D printing, you also get to break a lot of rules that you can't break in the real world. So it is a process, and throughout that process, you typically would end up making a series of prototypes before you get to that one, which the last one I like to have a factory make if possible, because that gets their floor engineers involved. And, the guy who's typically running the molding machine, he gets to kind of advise the hands-on prototype prototyping people about some of those little tricks that he knows from having done it for 30 years and knowing that, well, if I do this one little thing, which is not written down anywhere in a rule book,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I'm going to get a better part. So it is a process. And I don't know specifically what Elon Musk was referring to, but yeah, there is quite a bit of difference.
Interesting, interesting. How long would you say that time takes from having an idea, and obviously it's very dependent on the type of product, having an
Mhm.
idea and really getting to that polished prototype, right, where you can kind of show it off to people. Do you have an idea of like an average there?
Yes, I mean, if it's something simple, like a single piece of plastic or maybe, two or three parts that are assembled together, that can be a matter of really weeks or a couple months. Something more complicated that's got electronics, it's got some more complicated assembly, that could be several months. If somebody's working on something huge, like, I was involved in some like there's some really big equipment for Coca-Cola years and years ago. Well, that was it's like an 18-month process just to get to the prototype that kind of resembles what it's ultimately going to be. So yeah, I mean there are just too many variables to comment on that. One thing we can do fairly quickly in many cases is what I call a virtual prototype, and that's just it's in the computer and we can render it out and animate it and things that look a lot like a finished product, but at that point, there's still a lot of bells or a lot of smoke and mirrors involved.
I've been seeing also a lot more AR prototypes using that kind of virtual
Mhm.
technology, which is super cool, I think.
Yep, absolutely. I think that is an emerging process. I think it's like a lot of kind of bleeding edge technologies. People are using it in ways and at times when they really don't need to or don't benefit that much from it, other than just being able to say they did it and spend a lot of money
Yeah,
on it.
yeah.
But
It does look cool.
there is a growing need for that, or growing. I think the technology is growing in its simplicity and usefulness over time.
Got it. Got it. So I just have one or two more questions for you. And we can talk a little bit about Kickstarter and also where people can check you out. So one of my questions is, I think a lot of people who come, at least to me, they're like, Sal, I've never done this before. I've never made a product before. And I think it can be really intimidating. Do you feel like it doesn't matter what your background is when it comes to making a product? Do you think certain backgrounds, like having an engineering background, helps you? I've noticed, like, for example, a lot of construction workers, for some reason, being really interested in working on products. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I find that the best inventions or the best new product ideas come from people that are solving problems they're familiar with, or again, taking advantage of an opportunity that they're familiar with. So if you're, I do meet with a number of construction workers and contractors and people, home remodeling contractors and things because they're day to day dealing with, if I could only have an easier way to fill drywall hole patches, that's the client I have now, then that would save me time. And I know everyone that's in this industry would buy it. So we often see that some of the best ideas come from people that are on the front lines of various industries and places where that they've maybe had this workaround for years, and then now it's like, oh, why don't I just try to make this into a product? That can be, it can be construction workers, it can be nurses, and I've had a doctor that had a better solution for a way to clean out debris and wounds. So usually the best backgrounds are people that are close to the problem they're trying to solve. Now, if you're a doctor and you're trying to create a new child's toy, yeah, maybe it's a great idea, but that's a little bit, um, I would say sometimes a lower chance of success than if you are a child therapist or whatever trying to create that child's toy.
Mm.
But you can have a good idea in any space. It's just I think your odds of success are better the more you know about the space you're trying to innovate in.
Well said. Well said. So when we were talking before in the beginning of the interview or before we started, you were mentioning that you'd also worked on a couple of Kickstarter campaigns.
Mhm.
So I was kind of curious, if you were, your role you're playing there is kind of helping with the initial prototype development, or maybe you could speak a tiny bit to that.
Yeah. So, and as Kickstarter has evolved, my role has often evolved as well. But uh, I've had clients that have successfully launched through Kickstarter, and that's been great. I'd say one of the issues, or I say one of the things I caution people on Kickstarter is know how much money you need to need to raise. I mean, you're in the industry, so I'm sure you're familiar with all the horror stories about, they went out and they raised hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to develop and launch this product. But the problem is they didn't really understand how much money they needed to raise at the start. So they were, well, we raised $400,000. We're going to be great. Well, maybe, but what if that's a $500,000 development process to get that product launched? So I would say one of the roles I've been playing more and more is that early stage. Hey, we need to help you scope this out to the point where you even know what you're trying to what fundraise you need to do here. So we need to get you to the point where you actually have at least a preliminary factory quote to know that what you're going to need to sell these for, or whatever the terminology on Kickstarter is. I would say that's one thing that we've been doing a lot more of. And, of course, some people actually use Kickstarter more as a marketing tool these days. So they've already, they don't need it necessarily to fund their development or their inventory. They're really using it as a sales tool. So I've been involved in those types of programs as well.
Got it. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Really knowing your numbers and being intelligent about that, because that also hurts the community, right? If you're not delivering, or you really don't have good communication with backers.
You need to get some legit numbers. I mean, just going to some guy you went to college with who's an engineer and buying him a beer and asking, hey, what do you think it's going to cost to make this? You can't get an answer in 20 minutes that's going to be legitimate in any sort of way. You're going to get that guy's best over a beer answer. And that's great. And that's fine. That's a good data point. But it takes some effort and some time to dig into something to figure out what it's going to cost to, it's not just the cost of materials. You've got assembly costs. You've got, shipping costs. You've got, how's it going to be packaged? You've got, okay, are there any certifications it has to meet? It's a bunch of little stuff that, you can't simply throw an answer out in 10 minutes or even a day and expect it to be anywhere close to right.
Well said. Awesome, man. Well, there's been a lot of good information. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing? Where can they learn more about some of the work you've done and, check you out?
So the best place is the website. It's productquickstart.com. And it's a little out of date just because I've been so busy the last year and a half that I haven't had a chance to put any of the more recent programs up there, like the Conquest VR headphones I mentioned. But you can see a lot of good stuff there. There's a section there called Marketplace, which is actually links out to some of the smaller clients I've worked with that have launched in the last few years. You can link out and actually buy some of their products, which is cool. There's a lot of information on there. I used to, when I was starting this company, as I was building a client base, I would spend a lot of time writing these kind of helpful articles for inventor entrepreneurs. So that's just a free resource there. And of course, there's contact us form there. If you want to talk to me, I'll give 20 minutes to anybody to sort of bounce ideas off and see if I can help them or not. And you can find all that on the website.
Great. Thank you so much. My final question for you, and you can speak directly to the listeners on this. You could either end with a final tip. It could be a final bit of advice that someone else maybe has told you in your career. It could be a quote. It could be just a word of encouragement for someone who's trying to get started, anything along those lines. And we can end on that note.
Okay. So I would say specifically for inventor entrepreneurs, be careful not to just hear what you want to hear. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are going to tell you, hey, it's great, or hey, we can develop that, or hey, it's only going to cost. You get a lot of answers out there, but it's real easy when you're passionate and excited about something to hear just what you want to hear and not hear the whole message. So that's my tip. I run into that a lot from people that, that I have to kind of steer back on course. So I would say that's my tip.
Thank you so much. Look forward to checking out some of your work as well. And Noah, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it, and good luck.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Oh man, this was the most exciting interview that I have done in a while. And I'll tell you why. I think that when it comes to human beings, when it comes to, we think about human history, right, to get really deep, to get a little bit philosophical, if we think about society, we think about the past, really what's led to our upward surge as a civilization has been what? Has been the inventions, has been the new products, has been the new methods and the scientific things which we can create. And thinking back to ancient Roman times, the gears that they're making and making bridges and making aqueducts and all those kinds of things, that comes from taking an idea in your head and being able to make something in the real world out of that idea. And usually that idea solves a problem of some kind. Whether you're inventing a bow and arrow or you're inventing the latest watch or wallet, it's really a product that solves a need in some way. And even if that's need just to look cooler, right? It solves a need in some way. So the product functioning, the product form factor, the design of it, the sketches, everything that goes into kind of turning that idea into a blueprint, which then ends up being a house, right? Which is technically as well a product. There is a process for that. And hopefully in today's episode, you discovered and kind of, shed a little bit more light on that element of the process when it comes to launching a new campaign. Because the ultimate goal here is to be able to then share this with the world, do a Kickstarter campaign, do an Indiegogo campaign, get funds for this. Right. And the more that you can master this process, which is what I am so passionate about, and it's my mission, it is my absolute mission to teach you how to do this. The more that you can understand this, the more that you know the road ahead, right? The more that you understand what you got to do every step of the way. And let me ask you a question. When you don't feel certain, confident, if you don't feel like you know the road ahead, you don't know what to do next, what usually ends up happening? Well, usually, in my experience with a lot of my students over the years, they end up just kind of like spinning out and not really being super serious and kind of getting frustrated and be like, you know what, I don't think I can actually figure this out. I don't want to do this, or I want to do something else, which is easier, right? And they end up actually giving up on themselves and giving up on their dreams and giving up on this belief that this product is going to change the world or impact people in a positive way. So I think this is actually a massive problem. And one of the ways that I try to do this, aside from putting out education with this podcast, my YouTube, my books, my courses, all that kind of stuff, I also do intensive one-on-one coaching calls. And I haven't really been talking about this actually a lot publicly, but I've actually been working with more and more students go from idea to finished prototype. I actually have a couple right now that it's so exciting seeing that they're now working on their finished prototype, and they've come from concept sketches to make and model to actually having something that they're using and trying out and getting user validation and feedback. And then of course, I'm also helping them when it comes to their Kickstarter campaign in the future. So this is a long road. And what I realized when I first got into this industry back in 2012 is that just because it's a long road doesn't mean that you got to be alone. Doesn't mean that you got to be the only one who's walking that path, because it can be a very, very lonely road, and it can be extremely difficult as well, dealing with these obstacles, pushing past that uncertainty and really getting something out there. So if you do want to help, if you do want to explore that option, I do these intensive individual one-on-one coaching calls. Whether you're trying to launch a Kickstarter campaign, do an equity crowdfunding campaign, bring a new physical product into the world, I'm here to help and provide guidance along the way. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to my link at crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. We'll take you there. Fill out a little bit of information so I know more about you, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do, all that kind of stuff. And we can get that call scheduled ASAP, which can even just be the beginning of relationships, which maybe explore more long-term, or even helping you when it comes to execution, or introducing you to some of my contacts, resources, things that I know about that maybe you don't know about that really can help you when it comes to getting to this next point in your journey. So thank you so much for listening to this. If you did enjoy my podcast, please give me a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, please leave a positive rating and review so that other people know this is definitely worth their time, that Salvador Briggman is bringing those nuggets of crowdfunding gold every single week. Let other people know about this. So that is definitely something that they also check out and can benefit from. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Sal, and I will see you next time.